Outbreaks of rain, which as it comes south across the rest of Scotland into northern England, tended to break up into showers. So again, a mixture of sunny spells and showers for the afternoon. Mostly fine conditions for the second half of the week for the majority of places, but temperatures not that warm.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to Gloria Meets. 3 great interviews coming up for you this evening. We've been to Wigan to meet the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy.
There were a lot of members who said to me, you don't look like a Prime Minister, don't look like a leader of the Labour Party. And I knew exactly what they meant, and it's depressing. But the young women in particular won't have it. And there are lots of young women in our party now who are starting to change the game.
He was a Cabinet Minister under Margaret Thatcher and John Major. It's Peter Lilley.
Well, my mother was very upset at the thought that her integrity being impugned. I wasn't at all upset.
Elected in 2019 is the Conservative MP, Duncan Baker.
The sad thing was he passed away very sadly just 5 months before I was elected, and in my maiden speech I stood there in his shoes wearing his watch. My feet really hurt because his feet were smaller than mine, and paid a testament to the man who unwittingly set me on this path but never got to see me achieve it.
All that after your news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom. Nurses are calling for a double-digit pay offer to prevent further strike action. The head of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, told the Sunday Times the government risks another 6 months of industrial action if negotiations aren't reopened. Members rejected a 5% offer, which was accepted by 14 other unions. A new ballot for strikes will be held later this month. Residents in North Devon told us they need to consider the current economic climate.
I do believe they are worth every penny of 5%, but whether they're worth more, I think probably yes.
But we definitely need them, and we need the health service. It's being run down by this government, which can't blame them for COVID because it was a new disease, but the rest of it, they mucked up.
I think they should accept the offer that's on the table because we're all suffering from the cost of living crisis. And as a pensioner, although we've had a big rise this time, it's probably not going to last, and we're affected by everything as well.
Suggestions of unrest within the Conservative Party are being downplayed after the Prime Minister was blamed for the recent local election results. Rishi Sunak's facing criticism after nearly 1,000 councillors were lost and the decision to scale back post-Brexit plans to scrap EU laws. Former Home Secretary Priti Patel accused the leader of failing to listen to his party, adding the Tories hadn't covered itself in glory since Boris Johnson's leadership. Energy Secretary Grant Shapps says the Prime Minister is doing the right things and people need to be patient.
I think this, and she was referring to this set of elections, which were obviously very difficult for the Conservatives. There weren't a good set of elections for us. But this was the first opportunity people have had to comment on all the shenanigans of last summer and those many leadership changes that went on. I think people were venting their frustration. I actually think that Rishi Sunak, in his 5-point plan to halve inflation and grow the economy and reduce our debt and cut the NHS waiting list and stop the small boats, I think he's doing exactly the right things. And let's judge him against that. Let's judge this government against that when it comes to the next election.
The Shadow Business Secretary has defended plans to give workers the right to switch off outside of working hours. Labour wants to restrict employers from contacting staff by phone or email, saying workers should be able to disconnect from their devices in their downtime. Similar legislation is already in place in France. Jonathan Reynolds told GB News it'll promote productivity.
I think we do want to see kind of employment laws that will protect family life, give people some time in order to do the other things that are important in life as well as work. I think that's been eroded very significantly in recent years. I think the labour market itself means that more people want flexibility in the workplace, but I'm absolutely confident in the aggregate platform we'll put forward is the one that will give people hope and optimism and turn this country round after 13 years of Conservative government.
Labour says it has a plan to create 80,000 new jobs in the car industry, partly financing 8 factories if it wins the election. It'll also help power nearly 2 million electric vehicles. The party says the proposal will see the West Midlands benefit from 28,000 jobs and 11,000 roles will be created in the North West. Now, counting's underway in Turkey to establish who will be the country's next president. Voters have been deciding on whether President Erdogan, who's been in power for 20 years, should be re-elected. Opinion polls ahead of the ballot gave his main rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, a slight lead. A clearer indication of the first round result is expected this evening, and so far, it's still too tight to call. And finally, the Ukrainian president has received an award during his visit to Germany. He was presented with the International Charlemagne Prize of Action in recognition of the Ukrainian people and Volodymyr Zelensky's fight for freedom against what's been described as the unjustified Russian war of aggression. The board of directors said the award underscores the fact that Ukraine is part of Europe and the country supports the bloc's European values. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's time for Gloria Meets.
Lisa Nandy, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Labour MP for Wigan, elected in 2010. Normally we do these interviews down in London. You insisted we come to your constituency, so thank you for getting us out of London. It's an amazing ground here. Why was it so important for us to do it here?
Because you make me sound like a right drama queen, insisting that everyone comes to Wigan. But, well, I live here, and I wanted you to be here in particular because we're sitting at the DW Stadium, where home to Wigan Athletic and Wigan Warriors, our rugby league club. It was this club, Wigan Athletic, 10 years ago to this very day that took us all the way to Wembley, where we defeated Manchester City and won the FA Cup. It was one of the best days that Wigan has ever had, that I've ever had. 10 years ago, I was sitting at Wembley Stadium, Wigan on tour, all of us out there, and I wanted you to see it because this is the thing that has shaped my politics. It shaped who I am. It's shaped why and driven why I'm in politics. The people of this town are the most incredible people. They work hard. They have no time for some of the nonsense that goes on in Westminster. And I just really wanted you to be here to feel it and absorb it and to show it to all of your viewers, because this is what matters, not the pantomime that goes on in Westminster.
It's interesting what you've said about your constituency. And the reason why I find it interesting is because we got elected at the same time and we became friends. Had never met each other before we found ourselves in Parliament together. And I think we became friends largely because we didn't really like the House of Commons. We felt quite uncomfortable. It felt very strange to us. We were much happier when we were back in our constituencies. Have you made peace? It's 13 years since that election. I left the last election. Have you made peace with Westminster? Do you now get it? 'Cause you're good at it. Do you like the House of Commons more than you did?
So I've always liked the bit where you debate, the real debates, not the show like PMQs that's just there for the cameras, but the real debates. I've always liked that. And you don't see a lot of that on the telly, but you often you learn stuff from people, and you learn stuff from people who've got a completely different perspective from you, who've had different experiences. I learn lots of stuff from the other side and from my own side, and I often change my mind as a result. So that bit of it, that bit of it I really like. The rest of it I just find really difficult. It's getting off the train on a Wednesday evening, if I can make it earlier, if I can get away with it here. It feels like stepping into a different world from Westminster. The stuff that seems to matter there, it's so disconnected to what people are dealing with here, and it has been for 13 years, and none of that gap has really closed. I think, for me, that's been the mission of my 13 years in politics, is to try and take what is happening to people in places like Wigan and drag it into the Westminster bubble and force people to confront it. You remember those Brexit years, and after after the referendum and all these calls for a second referendum, people here just thought we'd gone absolutely mad.
We had.
All of us. Well, yeah, we had. You'd walk around the House of Commons and you couldn't shake the feeling that people had completely lost the plot. That gap just hasn't got smaller in those intervening years, and so, no, I find it really difficult still.
Is Keir Starmer on something then? Because he said this week, the public don't care about these woke issues. They don't care about woke. They don't go, have these conversations. Might happen in the media or whatever, but like in places like Wigan, in fact anywhere else, outside of maybe media land, no one's having those chats. Is he right on that?
I couldn't agree with him more. I was almost relieved when he said it, like someone had broken the spell. They're people who care about people in their community. We've got people going through gender recognition here in Wigan. I talked a lot about one of the young girls that's going through it here at the moment, and they care about the fact that those people are being demonised. It's not nice. We're kind to asylum seekers here when they arrive. We give them a proper Wigan welcome. One of my local charities was telling me the other day that one of the problems that they have is that people are really generous here and they donate a lot, but they donate the sort of food that we eat in Wigan. So there's a lot of pies, a lot of Christmas puddings, that sort of stuff around Christmas. And a lot of the asylum seekers are like, they've never seen this sort of food before and they don't know what to do with it. But it's when people try and whip up all this sort of woke stuff and these culture wars, honestly, people in this town just think they've gone absolutely mad. And they won't have it. They just won't have it. They won't have it from us. They won't have it from the Conservatives. And I just think Keir was so right to call it out, because it's just absolute rubbish. And it's part of that disconnect between politics and people. People here are talking about, you know, there's long waits to get an ambulance out, and you often find yourself queuing then to get into A&E. People are really, really worried about this sort of stuff at the moment, and any government that is fit to govern has to just fix the basics and take care of the basics, stop messing around.
You stood to be Labour leader at that last leadership election, which started right after that general election defeat in 2019. Obviously, you didn't win, but I remember. Thanks. It takes guts to put yourself forward for a position like that. Most of us wouldn't dream of doing so because it's hard. What was the hardest part for you about going through that contest?
I think you're right that, you know, it does take a lot of confidence to be able to do it. I'd never have done it if there wasn't a really compelling reason why I thought I had to. You know, it's not that I thought I've got to be the leader of the Labour Party, nobody else could do it. But at that time, we'd gone through this horrendous period where we'd become completely disconnected from the people who we built and founded the Labour Party with and for. People who felt, you know, not just really disrespected by what had happened during Brexit, but also, you know, we've gone through a period where we moved to the extremes in the party, where we were promising the earth to people who are incredibly grounded and realistic and could see that we had no ability to pay for it. They were worried about whether they could trust us with their money. It's their money and they haven't got a lot of it. They were worried about whether they could trust us to stand up for them in any circumstance, but particularly, you know, when we had the attack on the streets of Salisbury from the Putin government, and people really thought that we were siding with Putin over the British people. I mean, it was horrendous. I didn't come into politics to represent another political party. Labour is their home, and we'd taken that away from them. And I wanted to show them that we got it. And I thought, if we go into that contest saying we got it all right, Corbyn 10 out of 10, Brexit 10 out of 10, we just need to plough on and do more of the same, I thought that would be the end of the Labour Party. I thought we'd die and we would deserve to. And so I stood to give those people a voice, so that when they looked at that contest, they would know that there was somebody who was prepared to stand up and fight for them and their right to have the party that they built and founded back, representing them again in British politics. Now, I didn't win, you're right, and thank you very much for that very depressing reminder. But actually, in a lot of ways, I feel that the job was done, because when we started that contest, I was the only person on that stage saying those things, and by the end of that contest I stood with Kieran Becky, who I came to like a lot and respect and become good friends with throughout the course of the contest, and we were all saying it, and I thought, that's it, that's what I had to do.
When you're in a contest like that, you obviously go home at night, you're standing in front of members during the day, but you go home and you've got time to think. Is it dark? Are there dark moments where you think, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this?
Well, I think the bigger issue was that I didn't go home. I mean, you just go out on the, you know, you go out, you announce you're doing it, you go out the house and you don't really come back for months. And we do long leadership contests in the Labour Party. We like a long leadership contest. I don't think the public like it that much, but we do. And so it went on for a really long time. And I wasn't at home. It was difficult. My little boy was very little at the time and just didn't understand where his mum was. But then COVID hit and suddenly it all stopped, and that was equally surreal because we were still in the contest, but we were all sitting in our houses. So it was just a very weird time.
So many women, like yourself, have stood for the leadership of the Labour Party. None of them have come close. I sort of feel ridiculous. I'm stumbling because I think, how many times I've said, do you think there ever will be a woman leader of the Labour Party? Because it is literally now absurd, isn't it?
Well, it's pretty existential for us, I think, because we're the party that was, you know, I joined the Labour Party as much because I believe in equality and against discrimination, as because I want to fight poverty and because I believe and know that this country can be better. And so it's a huge deal for us, of course it is. And I think there will be a leader at some point who's a woman, but I think there's a problem, and I think that I've got a bit of an insight into it, having been through that experience and also been encouraged by lots of the women who'd stood before, very good women, who never made it. I think the problem is that when people look for the next leader of the Labour Party, they've got in their mind a view about what that is based on what it's always been. I felt that very much when I went for selection here in Wigan in 2010. We'd never had a woman MP here in the whole history of parliamentary democracy. And people were looking for the next MP. They were looking for the next guy, the next older guy who could do it. And I think that was the problem, actually. There were a lot of members who said to me, you don't look like a Prime Minister, you don't look like a leader of the Labour Party. And I knew exactly what they meant. And it's depressing. But the young women in particular won't have it. And there are lots of young women in our party now who are starting to change the game. And they're not just changing how they vote, but they're also perceptions of what a leader should be and should look like and how they should behave. But they're also changing their parents' views and their grandparents' views. And so I think that's changing. I think it's shifting, but it takes more women at the top of politics. That's why, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but I have such admiration for people like Tessa Jowell, who was my mentor when I first got elected, and the women who blazed that trail, because without them, I don't think I'd be doing this. And I think for my generation, that's what we've got to do. We've got to hand this on in a better state so that at some point, and, you know, I want us to win the next general election. I want us to be in power for long enough to sort out the very real problems that this country's got. But at some point in my lifetime, we've got to have a woman in that job.
Do you think maybe the male colleagues should say, I'm going to sit this next one out? Whenever that is, might be a decade, it might be 5, we don't know what's going to happen at the next election, we don't know how long Keir Starmer is going to be leader, but however long it is, should the male MPs who've got their ambitions say, I'm going to sit this one out because that's the only way we're going to get a woman?
Well, I think people have just got to start voting for women. I mean, we've seen it a bit in Parliament. We've had this thing recently where we realised that a lot of the chairs of select committees, which are elected by all MPs, so not just parties, but all MPs come together and elect. And we realised that we'd never had a woman chairing the Treasury Select Committee, we'd never had a woman chairing the Business Committee. So a lot of us just decided, well, if there's a woman on the ballot, I'm going to vote for her. And people said, well, that's nonsense because, you've got to vote for the best person for the job. But we got Nicky Morgan chairing the Treasury Select Committee, we've got Rachel Reeves doing Bays, we had the Business Committee, we had Yvette Cooper doing Home Affairs. You can't tell me that there are men better than them in Parliament. You know, they're top of their game, they're really good. And it's what, can't tell me that there's never been a woman before me that was good enough to represent Wigan. It's just that people didn't vote for it. The public will, but the problem is more that the perception within political parties is that the public won't wear it. Well, they will. We've seen it. We've had lots of women prime ministers now. And I think we've just got to vote for women.
OK. Right, let's do a bit more personal. So your dad, he's called Deepak. He is he's Indian. And he married your white mum.
Yeah.
This was in 1972. So
you know more about my family history than I do.
A very different time.
Weird.
A very different time of race relations in this country. They must have gone through it.
I mean, it was pretty. It wasn't completely unknown at that time, but it was pretty unusual. My mum says she's still got some of the letters, actually. People wrote her letters, because in the days when you would, I think people still do this sometimes, but you would announce in the newspaper you were getting married, and people wrote to her and said, think of your children, you can't do this. It was, more sort of kindly concern than anything else, but it was very, very real and very prevalent. And she tells a story about when they went to buy a house and they were moving to Manchester and they looked around she'd gone up first to look for houses, seen lots of lovely houses, gone back and said to my dad, this is great. They were moving from London, so, really excited they could buy an actual house that they could afford. And they went back with my dad and the estate agent said, I'm afraid we haven't got anything to show you at the moment. And there was a lot of that. It was what led my dad into the race relations world. He was an academic, he was an English lecturer, but if you can't go to the pub with your wife without staging a sit-in, you have to get involved. And so he did, and he got involved in race relations and he fought those fights all his life.
So interesting talking to you, because whenever trying to get to a personal question, you sort of move it to somebody else. What does being half Indian mean to you?
It's important to me. It's part of my identity. There's lots of bits of my identity that matter to me. I'm a Manc by birth. I'm a Wiganer by choice. I'm half Indian and very proud of it. I've been to India a few times. I don't claim to be a sort of expert on the culture, but I'm proud of it. And I think, being mixed race, growing up mixed race in the 1980s, did shape me a lot. It was never, ever an issue in Manchester where I was growing up. I grew up in Manchester and then later in Lancashire. And it was never an issue. It was an issue in national politics, and I remember that. I remember lots of Conservative politicians in particular talking about how people like my dad were coming into the country and we were being swamped. I remember the stuff they had to say about single mums, because my parents divorced and I had two very loving parents, but I lived in a one-parent household, and I remember how much we absorbed that as a kid, as kids. That I remember once walking out the door with my breakfast all down my jumper as usual, and my mum saying to me, "You can't do that, we can't do that, we have to be better than that because people are looking at us." And it was always there. And so I think that is partly why I'm in politics, because I knew that the country was better than that, because my friends were better than that, our community was better than that. And, sometimes I see, some of these young England footballers and the stuff they have to put up with, but how amazing they are and how they look like the Britain that that team looks like the Britain that I know and understand. And I think this country could be so amazing if we had a government that was as good as the people in it.
All right. OK. Final question. You're a mum. You've got an 8-year-old son. Are you strict?
God, no. No, I'm terrible. So, because I'm a bit, well, you know this, but I try to be very professional, but I'm a bit of a kid and I like to have fun. And so I am not the disciplined person in our house. I'm often the person that's being told off as well. We got him a Nintendo Switch during the pandemic, more as a way to keep us sane than to entertain him, to be honest. And I was on it so much that in the end I had to get my own because it was causing rows in the house. It's every evening my husband will come in and say, "Just both of you get off the Switch." So no, probably not. Oh God, this is awful. I'm going to get people writing in saying you're a terrible mother.
No, I think that's a really endearing story.
Going back to play on my Switch now.
You made me wait 2 years for this interview.
And you can see why, because you asked me questions like that.
Delightful. Thank you, Lisa Nandy. Thank you. Coming up, former Cabinet Minister Peter Lilley.
It doesn't quite feel like 1997. It's somewhere between 1992, where we thought we were going to lose and won, and 97, where we knew we were going to lose and lost. So I don't know which it's going to turn out next time. It could swing the 92 way if we're lucky.
Coming up, Conservative MP Duncan Baker.
Lost virtually all of the sight in my left eye, and you just get on with life, Gloria. I'd never talked about it publicly. I just didn't have one eye that didn't work very well.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Peter Lilley, good to see you. You were a Conservative MP from 1983 till 2017. You were in the Cabinet from 1990 to 1997. So I'm really looking forward to getting your reflections on that period. So you served in the cabinets of Margaret Thatcher and John Major, very loyal Thatcherite. But when the day came when she had to depart, and the Conservative Party decided that this was no longer tenable, you were one of the cabinet ministers who had to go in and see her and effectively tell her the game was up. Just take me inside that room.
Well, it was terrible because I hadn't discussed with any of my colleagues. I thought, rather cynically and wrongly, that they would all tell her, of course, Margaret, go for it, you know. And I wanted her to win, but knew that she probably wouldn't. So I was probably excessively brutal and said I didn't think there was any way she could win the second round. And she was obviously very shocked by this because I was her most loyal supporter and she'd had me in first to sort of get some momentum. And there was just silence. And I said, you know, I would support her whatever she did, but I thought in her own interest she shouldn't stand again. And I subsequently discovered that other members of the Cabinet had said the same thing. If I'd known they were going to, I'd have been less brutal in what I said. I'd have softened the medicine, really.
Were there any tears?
Not then, from her. There were when she finally left, and you can see that in the picture of her leaving Parliament, carrying a bouquet from people like me, which she sent a copy of that photo, and I have it proudly on my wall.
So when Margaret Thatcher did go, you served in the Cabinet of her successor as Conservative leader and Prime Minister. That was the Cabinet of John Major, who, during his premiership, things were very fractious in the Conservative Party over Europe. He did a TV interview, and when that TV interview had finished, he thought he was speaking off the record to the journalist in question. The microphone was still on, and those remarks that John Major made became public. You were one of the cabinet members in John Major's government, labelled the word starts with B and it ends in D. Were you deserving of that title?
Well, my mother was very upset at the thought that her integrity being impugned. I wasn't at all upset. And subsequently, some months later, I was summoned by John Major after a cabinet meeting to discuss a joint press conference we were giving. And there was an issue where another member of Parliament had also accused his opponent of being an unmarried mother with 5 little b****s. And in came an official and said, gave a bit of paper to John Major, and he said, oh, you better know this, Peter. That MP has finally agreed to apologise for calling the children of his opponent b****. I said, but Prime Minister, I didn't realise that was pejorative. It's the only time I've seen John Major lost for words.
Do you keep in touch with John Major? Are you friends?
No, I took it in good heart, and we seemed to get on terribly well in Cabinet. But when I read his biography, autobiography, he sent me a copy, I realised he didn't really like me. So there we are.
Does it hurt at all when you read memoirs and you're in it and people are not very kind?
Well, he's sort of kind but resentful. Respectful but resentful. No, it doesn't worry me at all. In politics, you don't agree with everybody. I was just surprised he seemed to take it a bit personally, the fact that we disagreed on some issues, rather than it was just part of political life.
Can you have friends in politics?
You can, and some of my best friends are in politics, but my best friends are outside politics.
So, as I mentioned, you were elected to Parliament in 1983. You stayed until 2017. So you have seen the rise, really, of the Conservative Party, and then the demise of the Conservative Party, the arrival of Tony Blair, and so many of your colleagues were gone in 1997. When could you see that coming? And do you see any parallels today?
It was certainly absolutely obvious more than a year before the election that we were going to lose. I knew, my officials knew, everybody knew. Now, it doesn't quite feel like 1997. It's somewhere between 1992, where we thought we were going to lose and won, and 97, where we knew we were going to lose and lost. So I don't know which it's going to turn out next time. It could swing the 92 way if we're lucky. More likely, the opinion polls will be telling us something.
Do you have any advice to the government, the leadership, to make it a 1992 rather than 1997?
Yeah, and that is govern for the long term. If you're seen to be doing things which will only come to fruition in future parliaments, and maybe unpopular now, the electorate will respect you for that. And they'll think, oh, they've got an agenda, let's see it through. If you're just doing things to try and minimise unpopularity before the next election, or make yourself even popular before the next election, the electorate in this country are very savvy. They'll see through that and they'll say, well, they're over and done with, let's have another lot.
More from Peter Lilley after the break. The illegal immigration bill. Do you think that's going to have a tough time in the Lords?
It will have a tough time, but it will get through, because if the Lords were to stop the measures to stop the boat people, that would be the end of the House of Lords. Then it would commit suicide. The public wouldn't stand that.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So let's get the benefit of your wisdom of spending 34 years on those green benches. What has been the biggest change in politics or the role of an MP? What did you witness change during that time?
Well, what I witnessed, and it's clear to everybody, but often ignored by commentators, is that members of Parliament became much more rebellious, much more willing to vote against the party whip. In the 1950s, there were whole years when not a single MP voted against the party whip. From 1970 onwards, each successive Parliament, more people voted. 4,000 voted against the recommendations of Mrs Thatcher during her 12 years. More than 6,000 voted against Tony Blair during his 12 years. Each gets more rebellious, and that's partly because of the development of the internet and emails, far more interaction between MPs and their constituents, far less party loyalty. So you're always feeling, what will my constituents think about that, rather than I've got to follow the party line. And that's a good thing up to a certain point. Beyond a certain point, it means that we become ungovernable.
Lots of people say that the political environment, the abuse directed at MPs, is something else these days. But actually, were you subject to a fair bit of abuse in your time in the cabinet?
Yeah, yes, it was fairly horrible during the back to basics time when, because of some way that I think John Major actually was referring to back to basics in education, but it came back to sort of personal morality basics. And so everybody was fair game, and they used to come around my constituency, knock on my neighbours' doors, know any filth about Lily. Fortunately, my neighbours kept all the filth they knew about Lily's secrets, so that was all right.
Wow, wow. And I'm interested in the job that you had for longest in government. That was Social Security Secretary from 92 to 97. You introduced incapacity benefit. That's money for people who can't work because they are sick or disabled. The number of claimants rose rapidly in the 90s. And one of the accusations that is made about that period is that during a time where the pits were closed, for example, then the numbers who went on incapacity benefit rose, and that was a way that the government tried to keep the unemployment figures lower, and it was a way to massage the figures. Did you have any truck with that argument?
I don't think it was ever deliberate, but it happened, and it did mean statistically fewer people showed up as unemployed, but they weren't working. But by the time I got there, unemployment was coming down, but the number of people on disability benefit was going up, and it had trebled in a decade. And part of the reason was there was no objective medical test of what constituted being disabled, and we introduced that. And it was expected to be hugely controversial. Indeed, the document I produced preparing for it, which I planned to send to the Prime Minister, was accidentally sent to the Press Exchange. And it spelt out warts and all the problems we were expecting. And when my official told me this, I thought it was a plot, but no, it wasn't. And I realised that. And actually, it made it much easier, because once I'd spelt it out, each successive interview I had to do, and I had to do 18 over a weekend, sort of claw things back, became easier because people started phoning in and saying, and about time too, the chap lives next door to me, trains for the Olympic team, and he's on incapacity benefit. And it was realised that there was a lot of abuse and misuse of the benefit. And more important, when people were helped back into work, they welcomed it. It gave them a sense of dignity and self-respect, which languishing on disability benefit indefinitely would not have been to their advantage or to their happiness and well-being.
Final question. You are now in the House of Lords. Lord Peter Lilley. If Keir Starmer does become Prime Minister, he says he is scrapping the lot of you, the whole institution. What's the best reason he shouldn't do that?
Well, it doesn't matter what the reasons are, he won't do it, because it's been the plan ever since the legislation in 1912 to reform said it will be replaced by an elected assembly in due course. It won't, because the House of Commons won't stand a rival chamber composed of elected people just like them, the second 11 basically, but with the claims to an electoral mandate who would conflict with them. And it would do away with something which the good argument for is it works. No one would invent it, but it works as a revising chamber. It doesn't work when it becomes a campaigning chamber, which it did during Brexit. But when it's revising legislation, when I was a Secretary of State and they revised my legislation, I'd first think, how dare they suggest any changes to it? It's perfect. But almost every occasion, I accepted their revisions because they were usually sensible.
It's just struck me since you said that. The immigration, the illegal immigration bill. Do you think that's going to have a tough time in the Lords?
It will have a tough time, but it will get through, because if the Lords were to stop the measures to stop the boat people, that would be the end of the House of Lords. Then it would commit suicide. The public wouldn't stand that.
Peter Lilley, fascinating trip down memory lane with you, and to get your thoughts on some of today's political events too. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Coming up, Conservative MP Duncan Baker.
People say, oh, you've changed their life. Well, you haven't. They've changed our life.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Duncan Baker, you were elected as a Conservative MP at the last election in 2019, but you used to be a member of UKIP right up until 2016. Why did you leave UKIP?
Well, it was really my stepfather that got me into it. I was never really politically active, but he always was a very, very strong advocate to leave the European Union. And I remember when he first sort of came out with it back in our local town, people thought he was absolutely bananas, you know. And he got me into it and said, look, you know, I want the sovereignty of my country back again. I want my grandchildren to live in a country that is free from the European Union. And I just started helping, and that was where the seed developed from. I never, ever anticipated to be doing this role that I do now, but it all really started from those campaigns to try and leave the European Union. And after we achieved the referendum result, I went to see him and said, you know, actually, I'm going to join the Conservative Party because I think I'm going to take this in a new direction with a party that I feel I can be part of for the future. He was a bit upset at the time.
Was he?
He was, but he'd been a Conservative himself before he left for UKIP, so he couldn't say too much.
And your stepfather was obviously a huge influence on you politically, but you lost him, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, incredibly sad story, really. He ran a family business back in North Norfolk that is very well known. And the first day I went to work for him, he said, you know, you're not going home at 5 o'clock when the lights go out. You're going back out into the community. We're a community business, and I expect you to go and do what I've done for the last 40 years, which is help the community around you. And that was where this politics came from. But it wasn't with a party. It was to genuinely go and serve the area that you were born and raised in. And after 10 years, Gloria, I said to him, do you know what? I love doing this so much. I think I'm going to try and run to become the MP. The sad thing was he passed away very sadly just 5 months before I was elected. And in my maiden speech, I stood there in his shoes, wearing his watch. My feet really hurt because his feet were smaller than mine, and paid a testament to the man who unwittingly set me on this path but never got to see me achieve it.
Why was it important to you to wear his shoes and watch?
Well, it was his absolute dream to leave the European Union. He had run twice to become an MP himself, but hadn't managed to do it. Yes, for UKIP. He got 8,000 votes in 2015. Ironically, he stopped the Conservative winning, so I might not have been here if that had happened. But I just thought it was a nice touch to have a piece of him with me that day, and hopefully he was looking down.
Now, let's talk about the sight loss you suffered as a child. What happened? It was the result of an accident, a football accident?
Yeah, we think that when I was about 8 or 9 years old, that's the earliest memory we had. I was hit in the head, as you are, you know, playing sport with your friends in the school, on the school pitches, and it was quite a whack. And then a few weeks later, you know, little boys are sitting there and we say, I can see with this eye and I can see with that eye. And I said, I can't see anything out of my left eye. And I remember going home that night and saying to my mum, Mum, I can't see out of my left eye. And she said, no, don't be so silly. And as we were driving along the road, she was pulling closer and closer to the car in front saying, read the number plate. And she was virtually, you know, bumper to bumper with this car in front. And I said, I can't see it. So we rushed to the opticians the next day. They immediately took me to hospital. I had a couple of operations. I had a detached retina, lost virtually all of the sight in my left eye. And, you know, you just get on with life, Gloria. I'd never talked about it publicly. I just didn't have one eye that didn't work very well. And it was a bit annoying at school because you couldn't play hockey or football or rugby, which I really wanted to do. But if you'd lost the sight in your right eye, you really would be struggling in life. So just got on with it. And it wasn't until I started doing this job, and I think a lot of the email work and correspondence, particularly through the pandemic, that my left eye started to get even worse than from the 25% that I had. It was basically down to nothing. And at that point, I went back to the optician and I knew I had a very dense cataract in that left eye, but the brain had switched it off. It said, it doesn't work anymore. You can't see out of it. And my left eye had just dropped to the side because the brain had switched it off. So they said, well, actually, you know, because you've lost all your sight, that's an emergency. So 6 months later, I had a cataract operation 4 weeks ago. And as I sit here talking to you now, that squint that had developed has absolutely gone. I can see you in front of me, and a miracle of the human brain that basically within 24 hours it said, that eye is working, we will start using it again. And I remember my wife pulling the bandage off the morning after the operation, one of my little girls looking over me saying, "Can you see me?" And I could.
Wow. God, you didn't talk about it when you had the loss, when you lost your vision in that eye. But what is the difference on a day-to-day level of now having the vision back in that eye?
Well, you have much more sort of peripheral vision, because you can see bits out of this side of your eye, which makes a big difference. The fact that my eye had switched off and had just developed a squint and it just was looking over here, actually, in my job made it quite difficult talking to people. A real loss of confidence because you hadn't had it, and then suddenly, I know that colleagues had noticed, constituents had noticed. They were too polite to really say anything about it, but it was interviews a year ago on television, and my wife saying to me, "Your eye has got so bad. Will you do something about it?" Which sort of inspired me to do something. And so, now within 4 weeks, it sort of recovering to the way it has been incredible. And, the surgeon who operated on me is similar age. We've become friends. It's been amazing, really.
Wow, good. We're all pleased to hear that. Now, you were the first MP to welcome Ukrainian refugees into your home, a mum and her son. Are they still with you?
Yes. So what we did after, it was the 3rd of April last year, and it's an experience. People say, "Oh, you've changed their life." Well, you haven't. They've changed our life. But we realised very quickly the war wasn't going to end, and we sat down with them. They became very close, and we said, "Look, we want to help you. We don't know how long it will be, but we have made a commitment and we're not going to break that commitment." So we said, you can either live with us, and that's quite an intense, we don't have a big house, we have a 4-bedroom, normal sort of family home. And so we said, look, we can either stay living all together, or would you like to have your own space and freedom? And they said, yes, we don't want to be far away from you. We don't want to leave North Norfolk. It's very rural, Gloria. We don't have any bus routes where I live, or train stations and things. And Anna, the mum, can't drive, so it was becoming difficult for her to have her own space and freedom. So we all worked together and we helped them get a little flat of their own. They're a mile down the road. And as much as I possibly can, when I'm back from London every weekend, we try to get together. We always try to have space. And the nicest thing about it is the children, they are all best of friends.
Has there been a particular moment over the course of the last year that particularly stands out to you, that has affected you emotionally or personally about the experience?
Last November we took blankets and sort of just sleeping bags for soldiers on the front line. So Anna Anna's the mum, had friends in Ukraine who were working for aid agencies. So she was brilliant, great translator, obviously, and was able to help us work with an aid agency. So we took little Svetik. He was amazing. 2,000 miles just to get to Ukraine. We drove over there in transit vans. And he came with us to see his dad again. He hadn't seen his dad for whatever it was, six or 7 months. So he got to see his dad, and obviously Anna got to see her husband. And I got to meet this man who we didn't know and whose little boy we were taking care of. And I struggle to talk about it now, but that was deeply emotional.
It sounds it, and we can hear the emotion in your voice. I really enjoyed getting to know you today. Thank you, Duncan Baker.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Back next Sunday at 6 o'clock. Gloria meets. See you then.
Hello again, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast, and we've got some patchy rain edging its way across parts of England and Wales this evening and tonight. A few showers elsewhere, but where skies are clearing across northern Britain and parts of Northern Ireland, well, we're turning quite chilly. That's behind this cold front in a colder air mass. This front then slowly shuffling its way further southeast as the evening and night goes on, not making it to the far southeast until later on. So a three-way split then to start our Sunday evening. Clear spells and a few showers across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. This front slowly working its way further southeast across England and Wales. The odd heavier burst of rain possible across parts of eastern England for a time into the early part of Monday. Damp ends the night in southeast England. Elsewhere, though, clearing skies, and where we've got those clear skies, it's going to be a chilly old night, actually. Temperatures close to freezing in a few rural spots, but this compensated for by plenty of sunshine for many places across the UK to start the new working week. A few showers, though, breaking out quite quickly across parts of northern Scotland, and as the day goes on, we see the heating of the day, so the showers will break out a bit more widely across parts of eastern Scotland, eastern England. The odd heavier one certainly possible further west. That's where we've got the best of the sunshine, lighter winds. Much cooler, though, compared to what we've seen over the weekend. Temperatures mid to perhaps upper teens at best. Driest in the west with the lightest winds. So